If you happen to stumble on my video about how my views on the US have changed after living abroad for 12 years, you might think that I hate the US, but that is far from the truth. In this video, I want to talk about many of the things that I still love about my home country, and interesting enough, some of the things that I called out in my previous video are actually on this list too. If you are new to this channel and you haven't seen me before, my name is Miguel and I have been living in China for 12 years now. I have traveled to many places including North Korea, Russia, Japan, Cambodia, and many others. During my time overseas and traveling, my opinions on the US have changed a lot, which is why I made the previous video, but I have also come to appreciate many of the things that people sometimes take for granted in the US. So let's jump into these things with number 12 on my list. I want to start off with something that not everyone will agree with, but I think it is uniquely American, and that is diversity. A lot of people commented on the last video that many people are trying to migrate to the US, and therefore the US can't be that bad, and I totally agree. There are countries that are dreadful and will mistreat people based on their religion, ethnicity, and any number of things that is different. One of the things that I love about the US is that everyone can find a place and even feel welcomed. It doesn't matter where you come from or what your background is, you can make a life for yourself in the US. Obviously, with so many different backgrounds and cultures melting together, you are bound to have some issues, but many of these issues can be overcome without violence, which isn't always the case in other countries. Following up with the last point is number 11 on our list that has to do with career opportunities. The US is still one of the easiest places to move up within an organization. I have been told to my face multiple times here in China from my boss that I cannot move up in the company because I was a foreigner. It is soul-crushing to hear that and very demotivating, especially if you like the job and are hoping to advance in your career. The US is still one of the few places where you can still move up in a company and even make it to the top, even if you're not a native. If you look at some of the biggest companies in the US, you will see that they have or had CEOs from all walks of life. America is still one of the few places that you can advance because of your talent, and I think that is really important. And because you are able to live freely and move into higher positions within companies, the US is often called the land of opportunities, which brings us to number 10 on our list. Number 10 is the American spirit. Some people might call it blind optimism, but it is the can-do attitude that has allowed the US to be one of the most innovative countries in the history of the world. When I first came to China in 2010, I felt that same energy here. Everyone felt that China was on the rise and everyone had a side hustle. Now a lot of that energy has dissipated, but optimism is far more important than people realize, and it is important if you want innovation and progress in your country. I think the American spirit has been lost somewhat in the native-born Americans, but many people that migrate to the US are eager to start a new life and have the can-do attitude. Many people still believe anything is possible in America, and that is important for innovation and entrepreneurship. And speaking of entrepreneurship, that takes us to number 9 on the list, which is starting a business. Starting a business in the US is pretty easy, even for a foreigner. There are a lot of different options from LLCs to corporations to just a mom and pop store on the corner. If you have an idea and can-do attitude, it is pretty easy to start a business, and according to data, the US ranks 6th in the world for ease of starting a business. Startups come and go on a daily basis, and people are encouraged to start something new. Most businesses fail within 5 years, but many people try and believe they can become the next Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates. Getting loans is oftentimes easier in the US, especially for starting a business, which isn't always good, but it does allow for more startups and entrepreneurship. Getting licensed is also pretty straightforward, and there is little or no corruption involved in the process. The local, state, and federal governments are pretty quick compared to other parts of the world, and overall, it is possible to get a business set up without major issues if you follow the rules. This capitalistic environment is why some of the biggest businesses in the world started in the US. That brings us nicely to number 8 on this list, which is innovation in higher education. In that last video about how my views changed on the US, I went a little hard on education and how many people don't value it as much as in other countries. But that is not to say the US higher education is bad. It was more a reflection on attitudes towards public schooling. The US still has some of the best universities in the world, and many are science and tech oriented, which gives the US a major competitive advantage when it comes to innovation. Despite how you might feel about the US, it is impossible to deny the scientific and technological breakthroughs that have come from the United States. There aren't many universities outside of the US that can compete on the same level, and although it is slowly changing, the US is still the best place for a science-based higher education. And because of that fact, many people remain in the US to work at innovative companies or startups. Combined with the ease of starting a business, it is not surprising that many graduates choose to work or remain in the US after completing their schooling. This is a streamlined process that takes the best and brightest from around the country and world and turns it into a strategic asset. There are only a few places around the world that have been able to replicate Silicon Valley, and many have tried. Next up on this list is public services at number 7. I pointed out that other countries have better public transportation and that the US is basically designed for cars, but I didn't touch on the other public services that the US is actually doing well. From libraries to parks to courts to emergency services, the US does a pretty good job at providing these facilities. If you dial 911 in the US, there is a good chance someone will answer and send help, which isn't always the case around the world. I have traveled to places where I don't think there are emergency services, and even if they did happen to arrive, it doesn't mean your situation will be improved. Although there are a lot of concerns about the police in the US, for the most part they are doing their jobs and trying to help. But in other countries, sometimes the police are the most corrupt and citizens do their best to avoid them. I think it is always important to remember that everything is a sliding scale, and the US is doing a pretty good job compared to the other 194 nations. I think many people in the US need to remember that and not take their position for granted. Alright, we have made it halfway through this list, and if you are still here, you probably like this video and agree that the US isn't that bad. Some things could be improved, but that goes for every country. And speaking of improving things, if you want more people to hear about the positive aspects of the US, hit that like button because it really helps YouTube know that people enjoy watching this video. Alright, let's jump right back into the video at number 6, which is generosity. If you look past all the negative news about immigrants, border walls, and everything else, and actually look at the numbers, Americans are really generous with their time and money. The Charities Aid Foundation publishes the World Giving Index, an annual report that ranks over 140 nations worldwide based on their level of charitable giving. The Global Giving Index aims to shed light on the scale and character of donating globally. The most recent edition, which was released in October 2022, showed that the top 3 countries were Indonesia, Kenya, and the US. The remaining 7 nations are Australia, New Zealand, Myanmar, Sierra Leone, Canada, Zambia, and the Ukraine. Although times can be tough for everyone, especially now, the US population is still willing to help people in need, which is something I really admire about my countrymen. The list is worth looking at if you have time, but overall, the US population is donating to good causes and trying to make the world a better place. Alright, keeping with a more positive theme before we get into the last few on this list, let's talk about the natural beauty of the US. If you have ever traveled in the US, you will know that there are many beautiful places in the country, and because of these places, the concept of national parks was born, which has had a major impact on the world. On March 1st, 1872, President Grant signed the Yellowstone National Park Protection Act into law, creating the world's first national park. I have been to many national parks around the world, and I have to say this act has had a massive contribution to preserving the world's natural beauty. By creating a framework for other countries to follow, this act has changed the world. I haven't been to enough parks in the US, but I have been to parks all over China, and thanks to that concept of national parks, the US and the world is a better place. Okay, the next 4 on this list are a little darker and will create a lot of discussion in the comments, but number 4 on this list is corruption at the local level. I believe the US is corrupt at the federal level and even at the state levels. But at the local level, there is far less corruption than in other countries. There are many corrupt countries around the world that are corrupt from the local level all the way to the top. But the US, for the most part, isn't corrupt at the local level. In some countries, the police will demand payments from local shop owners and are often involved in drugs and trafficking. But this is less common in the US. Corruption at the local level creates massive problems for everyone, and it is a major deterrent for development. We can and should have conversations about lobbies in the US, but at the local level, most services are carried out without bribes or violence. This is something that helps maintain social order and allows people to feel confident in everyday life, which isn't always the case in other countries. And one of the ways corruptions are exposed is through the press. I went a little hard on the mainstream media in my previous video because I think they have strayed too far from their main purpose of reporting factual news. Despite that, I think the First Amendment is vital for any country to hold their leaders and businesses accountable. The First Amendment of the US is freedom of speech, which includes freedom of the press, and this is extremely important for citizens to be able to expose crimes and corruption. Although the mainstream media has abused this and, in my opinion, abandoned the facts for profit, it is still important to have this in the Constitution. There are still many news outlets that report the facts and try to uncover corruption, which is important, and this amendment protects them from the government and other lawsuits. In fact, the First Amendment is very important for the US because it not only protects the press, it also protects religion, freedom of speech, the right to assemble or peacefully protest, and the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances, meaning the government isn't above the law. This is massive because in many countries, the dictator or ruling family is above the law, and they will crush any protests or religions that aren't sanctioned by them. And speaking of dictators, next on our list at number 2 is the right to vote for leaders. Although I don't agree with most of the politicians or their term limits, I do think it is important to have the right to vote. I think the US should go farther and make it a national holiday and actually force people to vote, but I understand that is a little extreme. The right to vote isn't unique to the US, and actually the US system isn't the best system, but the fact it still exists is important. I hope that more people will take the time to vote for people that will actually change the country for the better, and I think US citizens should be more respectful to the process. We can see how quickly it can be undermined and possibly removed if certain people get their way, and if that was to happen, it would cause more problems in the future. I hope that people will change the process and make it more balanced and more fair so that the election outcomes will better reflect the will of the people. I really hope that people understand how lucky they are to live in a country where they can make a difference and even change their political leaders without violence. We have made it to number 1 on this list, and before I reveal that, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel for more videos like this in the future. Also, before we move on, I want to talk about my feelings towards the US. I think the US is a country that has great potential to change for the better and to have a more positive impact on the world. The current politicians are too embedded with the corporations, but I'm hopeful that new people will get involved and have a different global outlook. I'm trying to promote peace with my videos, and I'm not trying to say one country is better than another. I believe with the right leadership and willingness, all nations can progress, but currently we are caught in this prisoner's dilemma. The only way we can get past this is to better understand everyone's needs and concerns. The US is an amazing and unique place that has changed the world, and I really do think the American people are genuine and honest. I hope that more people will focus on the positive aspects of their country and work to make it a better place for everyone living there. Alright, let's talk about number 1, which is the political system. Although I think it has a lot of problems and that it will take a lot of work to repair and make it functional for the people again, I do admire it because it can be fixed. Unlike other countries that have dictators or ruling classes, the US is still a democracy, which means the people can fix the problems if they truly want to change things. It might seem impossible and easier to give up, but giving up will lead to far more pain in the future. If the US democracy fails, nobody at home or abroad will benefit, which is why I hope the American people will come to their senses and reclaim their country. It should be for the people and by the people, not for the corporations by the politicians. If you made it this far into the video, I'm surprised, but I'm also happy you're still here. Thank you for watching, and if you want to see how my opinions have changed in my more critical rant about the US, you can click here and watch the previous video. Hope to see you over there. Bye-bye.